Well, so far in this chapter, Abraham has been forced to get rid of Ishmael and Hagar. And now, at this point, we are introduced, or reintroduced, to a character that has popped up most recently in chapter 20 of Genesis, and that is Abemilech. So, in case you didn't hear the last teaching regarding Abemilech, I think it's worth reading the entire chapter 20 of Genesis so you can get up to speed if you didn't hear it, or we can refresh our memories if you did hear it. And I'll leave a link to that episode in our media center on academybible.com. All right, Genesis chapter 20. Abraham left there for the region of the Negev and settled between Kadesh and Shur, while staying in Gerar. Abraham said of his wife Sarah, "She is my sister." And Abemilech, the king of Gerar, had Sarah brought to him as a concubine. But God visited Abemilech in a dream one night. "You are to die," he told him, "because of the woman you have taken, for she is a married woman." Abemilech, however, had not gone near her, so he said, "Lord, would you kill someone, even if he is upright? Did he not tell me himself, 'She is my sister'? And she herself said, 'He is my brother.' I did this with a clear conscience and clean hands." "Yes, I know," God replied in the dream, "that you did this with a clear conscience, and I myself prevented you from sinning against me. That was why I did not let you touch her. Now send the man's wife back, for he is a prophet and can intercede on your behalf for your life. But understand that if you do not send her back, this means death for you and all yours," all your kin, all your animals, all everything. The next morning, Abemilech summoned his full court and told them the whole story, at which the people were very much afraid. Then summoning Abraham, Abemilech said to him, "What have you done to us? What wrong have I done to you, for you to bring such guilt on me and my kingdom? You had no right to treat me like this." Abemilech then said to Abraham, "What possessed you to do such a thing?" "Because," Abraham replied, "I thought there would be no fear of God here, and that I should be killed for the sake of my wife. Anyway, she really is my sister and my father's daughter, though not my mother's, beside being my wife. So when God made me wander far from my father's home, I said to her, 'There is an act of love you can do for me. Everywhere you go, say of me that I am your brother.'" Now listen closely to verse 14 here. Abemilech took sheep, cattle, men, and women slaves, and presented them to Abraham, and gave him back his wife Sarah. Abemilech said, "Look, my land is open to you. Settle wherever you please." To Sarah he said, "Look, I am giving your brother 1,000 pieces of silver. This will allay suspicions about you as far as all the people around you are concerned. You have been completely vindicated." Abraham then interceded with God, and God healed Abemilech and his wife, his slave girls, so that they could have children. For Yahweh had made all the women in Abimelech's household barren on account of Sarah, Abraham's wife. Talk about a perfect picture of obedience. Not only on Abimelech's part, who did exactly what Yahweh told him to do, but Abraham interceded for him and returned a blessing to Abemilech. Abemilech can see the connection that Abraham has to this God who's not his, Yahweh, but he wants a piece of that action. And that's not a bad thing. Abemilech has learned a very important lesson. Fear of the Lord, something that many Christians don't have. today. Abraham is being a very good evangelist by showing who Yahweh is. It certainly helps that Yahweh himself shows up in a dream to Abemilech. Be that as it may, everybody did the right thing and was obedient. Well, that must have stuck in Abemilech's mind at that point, because here in chapter 21, after all this personal mess that Abraham has gone through, Abemilech can see where Abraham's blessings are coming from. He had a witness from Yahweh. Abemilech had a great witness from Yahweh himself. And he sees that the hand of Yahweh is totally on Abraham and his family. He'd like a piece of that pie. So in chapter 21, he and his chief go and make a little visit to him. So let's pick it up there. We're reading in our translation. It's just a short passage, because I want you to look at the underlying oaths and the different sacrificial things that go on here, and the issue of the water also, and see if you can piece some things together for us today who are under the new covenant. All right, this is verse 22 in chapter 21 of Genesis. And it came to pass around that time that Abemilech and his chief captain Phichol said to Abraham, Elohim is with you in all you do. He realizes that, and he's realized this for a long time. So this is what he asks Abraham to do. So swear before me, before Elohim here, that you won't cheat or lie to me, or with my son, or with my grandson. Now, what's the history there that we just talked about? Abraham did try to lie and cheat Abemilech back in chapter 20 by passing his wife off as his sister, sending Sarah into being a concubine, really, of this king of Gerar, which would have brought down that nation state to nothing, as he was forewarned. So Abimelech sees the blessing that's on Abraham. He wants a part of that, but he wants a treaty with him that he's not going to lie or cheat with him or his future generations, because somehow he knows that the Hebrew people, through Abraham, are going to be blessed for generations and generations. And he wants, I don't think it has anything to do with coexisting, but he wants a piece of the pie. He wants to ride part of the coattails of Abraham, as I would, as you probably would. I want a piece of that pie because that man is blessed, but I don't want him to try to cheat me again. That's what's going on here. So verse 23, so swear to me before Elohim here, we'll get to where here is later, that you won't cheat or lie to me with my son or with my grandson, but only to the kindness that I have done to you. And he was kind to him. Go back to chapter 20. When the lie was exposed, in order for that curse to lift, look at all the things that Abemilech had to hand over to Abraham. Most of the wealth of the kingdom. And Abemilech took sheep, cattle, men and women slaves, and presented them to Abraham and gave him back his wife Sarah. So a good deal of the wealth of the kingdom went right to Abraham. And Abemilech said, see, my land lies before you. Settle wherever you please. So here he not only got some personal goods, but he also got some real property out of it also. See, my land lies before you, and settle wherever you please. To Sarah, he said, look, I'm giving you 1,000 pieces of silver to your brother. For you, this will be compensation in the eyes of all of those with you. So he had to compensate for something he really didn't even do. He didn't know it. He didn't know. He was lied to. He got some really bad intel about this. But it was Yahweh who woke him up. She is a married woman. Abemilech, however, had not gone near her, so he said, my Lord. So he knew something, that this deity of some kind was quite powerful. Either you bless Abraham or genocide occurs. Let's not forget what it says in Genesis chapter 12, the call of Abraham. It says in verse 2, I will make you a great nation. And we can see by chapter 20 and chapter 21, that's beginning to happen. And I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing even to Abemilech. I will bless those that bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Now, we don't know if Abemilech actually gets all of this, but just by seeing Abraham and being around him and understand how anointed and blessed he is, he says it's better to be on his side than not on his side, because look at what his God does. I want to be part of his God. So God put it right back on Abemilech to do the right thing or not to do the right thing. And of course, he was fearful that he did. So he gets all this material stuff ready and gives it to Abraham and Sarah. And then Abraham prays, and the cloud is lifted, and everybody goes on with their lives. But now here in chapter 21, look what happens. Now he wants a covenant for generations to come. So swear to me before Elohim here. He knows Elohim. He knows he's the Lord. That you won't cheat or lie to me or with my son or my grandson, but only to the kindness. Remember, he's got all these gifts, these material gifts, including slaves, and he's got land. And he's got money from him. Lots of it. But only to the kindness I have done to you. You shall do to me. There you are. The golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. You shall do to me, and the land you have traveled around. In other words, the land I was forced to give you. And Abraham says, I swear. All right, there's an oath. There's a covenant right there. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Do to me, and I will do to you. So we're only going to do good things to each other at this point. Hallelujah. Before we do that, then Abraham has a little complaint. And it has to do with a well of water that he dug. Now, this seems like a little thing, but no, this is a big thing. While he was on this land that Abemilech told him to take, he said, there's the land in front of you, take whatever you want. Just don't curse me anymore, back in chapter 20. Well, here we go. Now, there's a little complaint. Maybe some of Abimelech's people were not too keen on Abraham having these Hebrew tribe running around their land. So they weren't too happy about it. So verse 25 says, then Abraham complained to Abimelech about a water well which his servants had seized. That would be Abimelech's servants. So in other words, Abraham and his people built a well And then Abimelech's people came and took it over, basically. And I can imagine that at this point, Abimelech was rather nervous because he probably does not want the Lord, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, to show up again in another dream. And so Abimelech replied, I have no idea who would do such a thing. And anyway, this is the first time I've heard of it, as you haven't told me about it before today. Okay, now here's a question. Do we believe Abemilech at this point? Is it really the first time he's heard of it? I have a hard time believing that. I think he's just making an excuse. But God's grace knows no bounds, and it seems to me that there are more important spiritual truths to be dealt with than this minor little fib. That doesn't mean that you can go out and fib and lie and cheat. That's not the point here. But Yahweh's trying to bring this heathen into the kingdom, quite clearly. So Yahweh is prioritizing his spiritual truths. He'll deal with the fibbing another time, perhaps. All right, so his conscience is clear, and he's going to do the right thing, and everybody else is going to do the right thing. Now, once again, it seems like that Abemilech is going to have to recompense Abraham again for something else that's gone wrong. But that's not what happens. Look very carefully at verse 27. Abraham, not Abemilech, Abraham took some of his sheep and oxen and gave them to Abemilech. In other words, he took the animals that he had gotten before and gave them back. Do you see how Yahweh works? If you do exactly as he says, you're going to be blessed. Maybe not immediately, maybe not anything. This is Abimelech's test of faithing. Remember, Yahweh, back in chapter 20, gave him an option. You can do this, as I tell you to do it, give them all this wealth, or you can sleep with Sarah and not give him anything, or die. Now, he could have chosen not to believe him, but he chose to believe Yahweh. He was going to risk the wealth of the country, or whatever it was, nation state, whatever they called them back then, and be a little bit poor for a period of time. But it, of course, in his mind, may be forever. He did get an immediate blessing because the curse of having no children was lifted on the people and the animals. He saw that miracle lift immediately. But here, the personal property returns back to Abemilech. Abraham took some of his sheep, oxen, and gave them to Abemilech. And they both made, no, not a contract, but a covenant. Many preachers, even great preachers of Bible teachers, don't understand that there is a definite difference between a covenant and a contract. Talk about driving me crazy. They'll say that a covenant is a contract. Well, no, it's not. A covenant is higher than a contract. It basically comes down to one side. In essence, it says that I will do this no matter what you do. A covenant is based on agape love. That's why a marriage is a covenant, not a contract. Whatever you do, I will still continue to do this. Now, there may be some consequences, but I will still keep my end of the bargain. Look at Yahweh's relationship with Israel. Yes, they suffered the consequences of being rebellious, assisting in the crucifying of Jesus. They've suffered because of that. But Yahweh continues to be faithful to Israel even today. That hasn't changed. That's a covenant. It's not like, okay, you crucified my son, Jesus, I'm done. I'm out of here. That's the basis of replacement theology, which is what most of the churches in America teach. Replacement theology. God is done with Israel. And wherever it says in the Bible, Israel, replace that with the church. That's heretical. No, they went into captivity. They've been persecuted terribly. But Yahweh continues to be faithful. That's what a covenant is. A covenant cannot be broken. A contract can. Because if I don't fulfill my end of the bargain, you can cancel it. If I want to order 1,200 widgets from you and pay you X amount of dollars for those widgets, and I need to have them in 2 weeks, but then you call me 1 week later and say, I can only get it to you in 3 weeks, you have broken that contract and I have a right to stop it. And that's the end of it. And then you have to pay that money back that I owed you and maybe some fine on top of that. So there's a big difference between a covenant and a contract. It's really important to understand that. If Christian people understood this, the divorce rate would be 0. All right, so within this covenant, let's take a look at 27 again. Abraham took some of his sheep and oxen and gave them to Abemilech, and they both made a covenant. 28, Abraham then set aside 7 ewe lambs by themselves. All right, 7, you all know that 7 is a very important number. And we all know what the lamb represents. All right, so he's putting the ewe lambs over by themselves. Why is he doing that? Well, he kind of tells us because Abemilech doesn't know what he's doing either. Abemilech asks in 29, what does this mean by setting aside these 7 ewe lambs by themselves? Verse 30, Abraham answered, these 7 ewe lambs you'll take from my hand, that they may give, listen carefully. These 7 ewe lambs you'll take from my hand, you'll take them, these are yours, that they may give testimony that I have dug this particular well. All right, this is not really about a well. This is about the covenant. Remember, we have we had so far? We've had a Noah covenant, we've had an Abraham covenant, and so he knows about covenants. He is teaching Abemilech a good spiritual truth here about what a covenant is. Back in chapter 20, Abemilech took sheep, cattle, men and women slaves, and presented them to Abraham. Nothing about sheep. So he's giving them back the cattle. Let's just say cattle. And here are the ewe lambs. These are separate. Lamb is representing the Messiah to come. 7 is the number of perfection, God's number of perfection. This is the testimony that Abraham is teaching Abemilech about this well I have dug, about the covenant I have with Yahweh. It's nothing to do with the well, really. Time to go deeper. So they named this place Beersheba, which is going to become very important later on in the Hebrew Scriptures. Now, depending on the scholars that you read, there could be one of 2 translations of this compound Hebrew word, Beersheba. In verse 31, it says, so then he named this place. Now you can either choose the well of the 7 or the well of the oath, because they both swore an oath. Therefore, they made a covenant in the well of the oath, or the well of the seven. Big spiritual truth here. The water, the well. Now, the well is a very important symbol in the Bible, in the whole Bible, although it's only mentioned by name once, which is in John chapter 4, when Jesus meets the woman at the well, which happens to be Jacob's well. James asks the question in chapter 3 of his book, does a spring or does a well gush crystal clear fresh water and moments later spurt out bitter salt water? And the answer, of course, is no. You can't have it both ways. It's either going to be a clear, spiritual, pure well, or it's going to be a defiled well. Now, let's go back to Genesis 33, 18 through 20, and see where Jacob's well originated. Jacob has just reconnected with his brother Esau. And then, verse 18. After Jacob came from Pan-aram, he arrived safely in the Canaanite city of Sichem and camped in front of the city. Verse 19, listen. He purchased a section of the field from the sons of Hamor, Sichem's father, for 100 kestas, whatever that is, where he had pitched his tent. Verse 20, and he set up an altar there and called it God, the God of Israel. Now, although there's no well mentioned by name, clearly in Succoth, where he purchased all this land, a well was there. Somewhere on this land was a well. And this is what the Samaritans throughout history have called Jacob's well. Now, let's go to John chapter 4. In verse 5 of chapter 4 of John, it says, so they came to a town of Samaria called Sychar, near the property that Jacob, that one that we just read about in Genesis 33, that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there. And Jesus, worn out from his journey, sat down at the well. It was 6 p.m. In verse 7, a woman from Samaria came to draw water. Give me a drink, Jesus says. In verse 9, she says, how is it that you, a Jew, ask a drink from me, a Samaritan woman? For Jews do not associate with Samaritans. And Jesus says in verse 10, if you knew the gift of God and who is saying to you, give me a drink, you would ask him, and he would give you living water. Living water. So this symbol of the well goes on and on. You can't get brackish water and pure water from the same thing. He says in verse 21, believe me, woman, an hour is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you don't know. We worship what we do know, because salvation is from the Jews. And that's for all you anti-Semites out there that are listening to this. Salvation is of the Jews. This is which really creeps me out about the truth movement. This is the only thing about the truth movement. The truth movement tends to be anti-Semitic. I don't understand that. When you got so much truth on one side, and you're going after the truth, and yet talk trash about God's holy people, the Jews. That's another story for another day, however. But an hour is coming, and now is here, when true worshipers, he says, will worship the Father in spirit and truth. Look at all the dualities concerning the well of the oath, contract and covenant, pure water, salt water, spirit and truth. Yes, the Father wants such people to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. That is the symbol of the well. To worship Yahweh and his son Yeshua in spirit and truth. That is clearly the oath or the covenant of the well. Along the same lines, it's not really a well, it's a pool. But in John chapter 5, we have the event, the paralyzed man who has waited 38 years to get into the pool. And this is the pool where the angel comes down and stirs up the water. The first person who gets in gets healed. This is where Jesus asks the man, do you really want to be healed? And then everybody gets into trouble. So here again is another example of the well of the oath. There's healing in your salvation. There's healing in this oath of the well, in this covenant. And then finally, another example, John the Baptist. What does he do? He baptizes people for repentance of their sins. How does he do it? By water. He does it in a river, not a well, but all these things go hand in hand. And so the foundation of this covenant, of this oath of the well, begins with water. And while we're on the subject, when Jesus was hanging on the cross, the centurion stuck his sword in Jesus' side, and what came out? Another duality, blood and water. This is not about Abraham fulfilling his side of the covenant. There's already a covenant with Yahweh. So Abemilech has nothing to worry about. They both made an oath to go by this covenant. Now, the last part of verse 32, Abemilech and his chief army captain, Phicol, both got up and went back to the land of the Philistines. And they went back to the land of the Philistines because that's who they were. Meanwhile, verse 33, Abraham planted an ishal, or tree or grove, or tamarack tree, in Beersheba, or the well of the oath, and called on the name of Yahweh Olam, which is the Lord forever, or the everlasting Lord. There you are. This is land dedicated to Yahweh, and those who honor his oaths and the covenants they have with him will continuously be blessed. This is the spiritual truth that Abemilech learned from Abraham that important day.